Welcome to DCL 307, my second video on DMR. There will be at least two more after this. In this video, I want to talk about two topics. Once I get this covered, in the next video, 308, I'll get out my DMR radio. I'll take you from programming the radio as if it came right out of the box from the factory and put it in on your local repeater. Now, the topics I'm going to cover in this video are pretty basic, and I think they'll be pretty easy to understand, but that doesn't mean they're not important. In fact, if you can grasp the material in this video, I think sitting down programming a DMR radio will be a lot easier for you. And let's face it, even in the land mobile market, let alone ham, programming a DMR radio is a whole world different from programming an analog FM radio. But it doesn't have to be hard or impossible. And I want you to understand what you're doing so it's fun for you. Because remember, this is a hobby. We're supposed to be enjoying what we're doing. Before I get to my two topics, I wanted to briefly mention, again, in ham radio, we only use Tier 2 DMR because we have no need for trunking. Now, the fact is, we don't even employ all of Tier 2 in ham radio. Does that mean that what ham radio is a shortened or cheap version of DMR? Well, no. Because hams are doing things with DMR that the land mobile radio world has never attempted and never will attempt. Primarily what I am talking about is how we have created a worldwide DMR network that has never been done before. And I'm sure that land mobile radio will never bother because they have no reason to. You see, in land mobile radio, if I put a DMR system at the local prison and another one at the school system, those radios and systems have no clue about one another, nor do they care. But for us, we do care because the amateur fraternity is one big club that covers the world. Now, on that thought, I would ask you to think about something. When you were studying for your ham license, did you study FCC Rules 97.1? Take a look at paragraphs B and C. If you go to the trouble to learn how to program, deploy, and use DMR radios, you have acquired a job skill that is valuable in the land mobile industry. My point is, you are contributing to the content of paragraphs B and C. And look at paragraph E. Up until now, to talk to hams in other countries took shortwave radio. Now you can sit in your easy chair with your portable radio on the local repeater or on a hotspot and talk to hams in other countries, even all the way around the world on other continents. It is for these reasons I am very excited about DMR and ham radio. And I would point out to you, I've worked in land mobile radio for 40 years. I've worked with DMR for over 10 years, and I've been a ham operator for 50 years as of this year. And yet, I never imagined that ham radio would accomplish what we have accomplished with DMR. So don't be afraid to feel a little proud of what we've done. All right, two topics. Let's compare analog FM and what I call the DMR call, and then we can talk about repeater linking and the worldwide network. Let's start with analog FM versus the DMR call. You're familiar with your local FM repeater, and you've got your portable or your mobile. And like in my hometown, we always used what we called the 115 machine. We would dial up 147, 115. That's the output of the repeater, and listen. And if we wanted to transmit, we had to transmit 600 kilohertz higher because that was the input to the repeater. Now, with the advent of DMR and the documentation that came with it, we generally don't talk about input and output anymore. We're using a new term, uplink and downlink. These are kind of like satellite communication terms, but they apply to terrestrial radio as well. Think of it that I am transmitting up to the repeater up on the hill, and the repeater transmits down to me down at street level. Just think of it that way. Now, again, with repeaters, we generally dial up our receive frequency or our downlink frequency. Then we have a little switch, and depending on where we place the switch determines where we're transmitting. That is what frequency we're going to transmit on. And in this case, we would never use the down offset or the negative offset because that's 5 kilohertz from the national calling frequency. So the point is, we don't really input both frequencies, only one, and then we put in an offset. So analog FM is very easy. Pop in your receive frequency, punch in your transmit or your offset, and you're ready to go. If there's a lot of interference in the area, maybe the guy that put the repeater up put a continuous tone-coded squelch module on it. That means now you've got to transmit that tone along with your audio, and that tone tells the repeater it's okay to repeat your message. Back in my day, of course, we didn't have tone. Everything was carrier squelch. Any time the repeater heard any signal, it would transmit. Now, notice one thing. All calls go to everyone on the repeater. So you either transmit or you don't transmit. DMR offers more, so it demands more. Things get a little more complicated. Let's talk about the DMR call. We can place a group call, which is you're calling many people. You can place an individual call, which means you're calling one other radio. Or you can do an unaddressed call or an all call, which is supposed to go to absolutely everybody in range. Now, this is defined in the protocol. Just beware that it's not always supported by all radio vendors. And besides, in ham radio, what we really care about are group calls and individual calls. By the way, individual calls can also be called private calls. It's the same thing. All right, so let's start out. We need our two frequencies, right? But DMR doesn't understand tones. DMR likes to use what are called color codes. These are digital signals on the transmission. You can choose any one of 16 color codes. Yes, 0 is a choice. Remember, you're in the digital world now, so 0 is now an official number. So you have 16 codes from 0 to 15. But you've also got to specify a group ID. There are over 16 million valid group IDs. Oh, and you've got to determine time slot. It's going to be 1 or 2 or A or B. And again, it depends on who wrote the software if they use numbers or letters. Just remember, A and 1 are the same thing, and B and 2 are the same thing. There's one other item missing here. Remember I said you could always, or you had the opportunity to make an individual call. That's because every radio has its own radio ID number. Now in land mobile radio, we call that a unit ID or a UID. In ham radio, we call it a radio ID, but it's the same thing. If you wanted to put many group calls for many different talk groups, all on the same repeater, you would create many channels or personalities, and only those last two items would change. So you see a lot of your programming, you're not really changing that much from entry to entry. Let's talk about the individual call. We start off with the same stuff, except we replace the group ID with a radio ID. When you use the programming software, you're going to choose group or individual, or group or private call. When you make that selection, it sets a flag in the radio's transmission, so all the other radios and the repeater know whether you are addressing a group or a radio. And that's important because, as you can see, the range of numbers for both is the same. And again, the individual call is often called a private call. If you are going to put many private calls in your radio, all on the same repeater, then it's just like the group call. Only the last two items change from entry to entry. This is where a copy channel or copy entry command comes in nicely. Very quickly, I want to talk about the unaddressed call. You see, when you enter it, you just don't put in a group or private number. The software then directs the call to one of the unaddressed call IDs. This varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. The idea is an unaddressed group ID is kind of like a generic thing. Now again, this is defined in the protocol, not supported by all radio vendors. All calls work the same. There's a different range, and you'll have a little flag in the radio where you can specify all call. You won't know what group ID it's going to, but it'll be one of these valid all call IDs. And again, this isn't always supported by all vendors. So here's a review. You're going to put in all of this information for every call you want to put in the radio. And again, remember, this up here is global. You generally put it in the radio one time, you never touch it again. You never enter it again. So those are calls. So when I say calls, in analog FM, there's only one kind of call, the everybody call. With DMR, you have different kinds of calls that go to different numbers or groups of people, or radios actually. Let's talk about the network now. This is where it gets really cool. The DMR repeater in your radio looks just like an analog one in a way. And let's throw your friends in here. Okay, so you guys put up a repeater in your hometown. You're not connecting it to any network. You don't want to talk to anybody else. You just want to play around with DMR radio. You can assign any radio IDs you want, any group IDs. You can do anything you want. Of course, if you do this, you're kind of limiting yourself because now you're not part of the worldwide network. You're just off on your own. All of the, well, not all, but most of the advantages of DMR are missed when you do this in the ham radio environment. We do it in LMR a lot, but don't do this in ham radio. Instead, why not join the worldwide DMR community? It's very easy to do. So let's think about if there was a repeater in the next town that was a DMR repeater as well. You could maybe link the two repeaters together, but now you've automatically got a problem because what if one of the radio IDs you chose, they also chose? This is a terrible problem because what they call the stack, that is the protocol embedded in the radio, in DMR, most DMR radios can't stand to get a call from a radio ID that matches their own ID. The radio flips out. It doesn't damage anything, but it doesn't work. So the first thing you've got to do is ask yourself, how can we stop this? Well, if it's just the group in the next town, you could all agree to use different blocks of radio IDs. But if you're going to connect to the worldwide network, you need a unique UID or radio ID that nobody on the planet has. That's easy to do. Go to radioid.net, punch in all your license information, and at no cost to you, in maybe 24 to 48 hours, they will issue you your own ID. Now you have a worldwide exclusive custom ID. Let's go back to this imaginary network. You're going to assign talk group 9, probably, let's say on slot 2 to your repeater. Over here, they've assigned 9 to slot 1. Well, we designate this in the repeaters to be local. That means it never gets passed on to the network. So you can talk on your group 9, I can talk on my group 9. We don't hear each other. We don't bother each other. But when we want to talk together, let's use over here talk group 3148 on time slot 1, and 3148 over here will be on time slot 2. Doesn't really matter what time slot. Now, let's link the repeaters through the internet. Well, except that doesn't really work that well. Instead, let's link them through the internet using a ham radio DMR network server. There are many to choose from. These are a few of them. There's many more. Believe me, there's a lot of them. Now, because we're using a network server, the network server will arbitrate the call. So let's walk through it. I transmit on 9, I stay over here. I switch to time slot 2 and transmit on 3148. My call is passed to here. It's then passed to here, and these guys can hear me. Well, actually, there's an exception to that, but I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, what you're finding out is it doesn't matter that this is on time slot 1 and this is on time slot 2. What matters is the radios have been programmed, well, the repeaters have been programmed to pass 3148 to the network. The network says, oh, okay, I'll pass it on, actually, to all other repeaters in the world that have that talk group active. Now, I picked on 3148 for a reason. 3148 is kind of like the Texas state channel on many networks. So much so that if my repeater is on, say, let's say my repeater is on Brandmeister and your repeater is on Amcom, will the call go through? Well, you've got to check with your provider, but the network providers tend to share talk groups and bridge between networks. So you've got to do a little bit of homework to see what your provider offers. But generally speaking, yes, the call would go through. Now, I mentioned something a minute ago about how do you know if the call really goes through? To understand that, we have to talk about a new topic, dynamic or static. You see, talk group 9 here and talk group 9 here are always available. They're always local. They never go anywhere. Those are static talk groups. They're always there. This one and this one are dynamic. That means they might be there, but they might not be there. How do you know? Well, if I key this radio up on 3148, I enter the network. If this one is listed over here as a dynamic group, it does not repeat the call unless a local operator keys up on 3148 and activates it. Now, for generally the next 15 minutes, anything I say over here will get repeated here. Anything they say will get repeated here. Each repeater will time out in, usually, it varies, 15 minutes. After that time, you've got to reactivate the group. So this is kind of the fun thing about it, is you don't know for sure your call is going to go through unless you do your homework and you find out over on this repeater, 3148 is a static talk group. It's always on. That means if I call on this talk group and the time slot this is assigned to is not busy, the call goes through. I will come back to this a little bit later in this video. Now, one other thing. The big reason for dynamic groups is you might have several dynamic groups linked to the internet. Well, you can't key up all three at one time. There's not enough time slots for that. So we make them dynamic, and then we make our users share. So if I get to group 3148 and am using it, and you try to use group 13, you will get rejected until my group time is out. Then you can probably grab the slot from me for about 15 minutes. So you see there's a little bit of fun that goes on here. But in times of emergency, the programming of these groups can be altered. You can make a group static if that's what is needed at the time. And again, I'll come back to this in a few minutes. To make it clear, we're not linking to just one repeater. We are linking to the entire ham DMR world. Now, obviously, most repeaters in the world probably don't have any of our talk groups loaded in them because they're in other parts of the world and they don't care about what's going on in Texas. But the point is, those that are interested, you can link to. And actually, there are groups that are, quote, worldwide or global. Those can be kind of busy groups, but it sure is interesting. You never know who you're going to end up talking to. So what about hotspots? Well, a hotspot is kind of like putting up your own repeater, except it's not a repeater. It's just a little low-powered radio. So you plug it in, and you pick the DMR provider you want. And now you have control over how your talk groups act, how often they're available, are they dynamic or static. It's all your decision, except, of course, some network providers have special rules for hotspots. They might not even allow a hotspot on their network because hotspots tend to cause a few problems. But don't worry, those problems are able to be mitigated. So it's an option. A hotspot is always an option. And you can always pick one or more providers and use the provider that gives you what you're looking for. I'll do a separate video on hotspots probably by July of 2025. All right, I've got a couple of resources for you. I'll have more resources for you at the end of the next video. The first one I think is the best. It's called repeaterbook.com. Put this in a search engine, and when you get to the website, scroll down the page to the DMR repeater link and click on it. You'll get this. Now what I did is I put in Texas and I hit search repeaters and I got this page. Let's take a look at this. Here's our receive frequency or our downlink, our offset, the color code, what town it's in, what state it's in, or I'm sorry, what county it's in, the call sign of the trustee. Oh good, it's open. It does DMR and it's on the Armadillo network. Now, if I were to scroll down the page to a repeater close to me and click on the frequency of that repeater, I will get this. This is a repeater not far from my house. Notice you've got downlink, uplink, offset, color code. DMR is enabled. Both time slots are linked. This is not always the case. Now what's really interesting, you see all these talk groups with a 15, those are dynamic talk groups. Those without a timer on them, I am assuming, are static. And what that means is, if you look really close, here's talk group or slot 2. You've got 2 static talk groups. Slot 1, you also have the local repeater called group 9 and the North Texas wide group. Those are static, meaning if the repeater slot is not busy and you grab one of those static groups, you can tie it up for as long as you want, or at least as far as I know, as long as you want. The other ones are limited. And if you look at the name of the group, you'll see why they made them static, because they're probably very helpful for local emergencies, local rag chews, public service events, things like that. The dynamic talk groups are there for entertainment purposes, but they aren't that big of a priority to the repeater owner. This is a wonderful site. I encourage you to peruse it. And based on what I've already taught you, you actually can learn more just by looking at what's out there and what's available. There is another place to go. If you like to read a lot and want to read a lot about DMR and definitions and things like that, I found this gentleman's site wonderful. Type in his name plus DMR into a search engine. Look for this result. Click on it, and on the page that comes up, scroll down and find this banner. Below the banner, down here, right below it, will be a long series of paragraphs that explain so much about ham radio DMR. And then click this link and it goes into even more detail. This site is I just think it's a wonderful site. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot to read, okay? Next time, I will open the video with my radio programming software visible. I will have the radio sitting here set up as if it came new from the factory with nothing in it. And I'll show you how to put in your first talk group, your radio ID, and get it ready to go on your local repeater. When I set mine up, in less than 15 minutes, I was talking to a guy on the local repeater for the first time. Now you're going to hear about contacts. I'll leave you with this until next time. All a contact is a group number or a radio ID number. That's all it is. Now exactly how they work, well, that's a little different, but don't get all upset and confused about contacts. We'll talk about that the next time. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. I really do. And when we come back with the next video, I will walk you through radio programming. And I think by the end of that next video, you're going to feel like DMR really isn't that bad. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.